Ranking Member Boyle, could you please take your seat? We'd like to get started here. I know you're still riding high after that Notre Dame win. There, for the record, right? 48-20 for the record. The hearing will come to order. Today's hearing will examine the need for a fiscal or debt commission. We will hear from a panel of experts, including current and former colleagues that have been through these battles and have lived to talk about them. In fact, it's a little, it's just extra special to have my mentor and friend Steve Womack, who I'm now literally serving as chairman in the shadow of this beautiful portrait behind us. And so it's an honor to have you back here in your chamber. Senator Rob Portman, Ambassador Portman, is from Ohio. We're delighted that you're here. And he was a member of the bipartisan bicameral super committee established as part of the Budget Control Act of 2011. He also served as director of OMB during the Bush administration, which is where I got to know him. And he has given a lot of thought to these issues over the years. Ambassador, thank you for your time, and we welcome you here. And what is he? And an alumni of the People's House. That's why we have you here, because we can actually, you're one senator we can trust. Well, we have two, actually. Chairman Kent Conrad, welcome. Our friend from North Dakota has also worked on budget issues for a long time, obviously, former chairman of the Senate Budget Committee from 2001 to 2003, 2007 to 13. He's one of the principal authors of legislation that served as a template for the creation of the Simpson-Bowles Commission. And he served on the Simpson-Bowles Commission and worked to advance their recommendations in the Senate. Chairman, we're delighted that you're here with us today. Again, Chairman Womack, my dear friend from Arkansas, it was because of him that I served on the Joint Select Committee on Budget and Appropriations Process Reform. He chaired that. He's a cardinal on the Appropriations Committee and has served again as ranking member and chairman of the Budget Committee from 18 to 21. And last but not least, our friend and fearless leader, once upon a time here in the Budget Committee, Chairman Yarmuth from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, spent most of his time in Congress working on these very issues that we'll be discussing today. But he served as ranking member and chairman on this committee from 17 to 23, was also on that Joint Select Committee. And thank you for your service, Mr. Yarmuth. And I'm now going to yield myself such time as I may consume, and I'm going to try to consume just a brief period of time because we're going to be pressed, I think, to leave here by noon for a vote on the floor. I'm going to speak just off the cuff here. We've had a lot of conversations on our side, Jimmy, over the last few weeks as it relates to the leadership of our conference. And I'm proud to say that we are wrestling with things of the greatest import, which have to do with our fiscal health and the deterioration thereof in this country, and the important and difficult things that we have to do to address it so we can right this ship and so that we can ensure that our children are in good financial stead and that they will not have to dig out of a hole of trillions upon trillions of debt It's not right, it's immoral, and I don't think anybody on this committee, Democrat or Republican, thinks it's acceptable. We laid out the reverse the curse budget resolution. It's our job. I think one of the problems with this place is we don't do our job, and we don't do it very well. We don't do it on time. We don't take it seriously. We don't have the process that encourages or forces us to do this job, and so we just don't. We avoid these difficult conversations, and it's getting more difficult, so it's easier to avoid them. And by the way, both sides do it. We don't pay for things. We don't authorize before we fund things. And it's just a big ball of dysfunction. And it's no wonder that we are at a place where we are at a $2 trillion annual deficit clip that will double in 10 years. And we are at an almost $1 trillion in interest payment clip that will triple in 10 years. It's no wonder with the dysfunction and the mess of this process. Here's one thing that I believe. I can't speak for all my colleagues, but we have to address mandatory spending. And while we're obsessing over the 1/2 of 1/3 of 1 year's discretionary budget, and I don't want to dismiss the fact that we ought to get our fiscal house in order, and there's waste and unnecessary spending on the discretionary side, and we ought to get after it and be stewards of the taxpayers up here. So it's not to diminish the discretionary, but it's the mandatory spending and the entitlement programs that are really driving the debt, and that if we don't address them, will truly bankrupt this country. Now, here's the deal. If you look at it, the unfunded liability over the next liabilities over the next 30 years, about $120 trillion. 99% of the cost, the unfunded liability, are two programs: Social Security and Medicare. And Social Security and Medicare are critically important to our seniors. And in this budget window, they will be insolvent. And so we have to address the solvency, and we have to address the sustainability, not only for seniors today, but for the future. So it is my strong belief that the Republican Party unilaterally will not be able to solve those issues, nor will the Democrat Party in this chamber or in either chamber solve the issues of Social Security and Medicare. They've been too politicized and weaponized over the years. I think we need a debt commission of some sort, but we have to have a commission, a framework, a model that works. And the reason we have you here is to share with us your experience and your wisdom so that we can apply the necessary contours to whatever debt commission we can pass, so that in the ultimate analysis and outcome, we have a solution that we can hold hands together in a bipartisan way and not only move that issue forward, but move the country forward with some peace of mind and confidence that our country is on a better path. So that's the fundamental question as I see it. Good gentlemen, how do we do this, learning from all the different commissions, the one we served on, Steve, the 2011 Super Committee, the Simpson Bowles, the Greenspan? How do we do this so that it works, not just for this institution, but most importantly for the American people? And with that, I yield to my ranking member for as much time as he may consume.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm just on a personal level very excited to welcome you back, Chairman Yarmuth. Chairman Yarmuth served as chairman of this committee and in Congress with great distinction, and also was just a wonderful friend and someone who really was a role model for me. And thank you, my friend. Would not be in this where I am, wherever that is. I would not be here without you. So it's great to have you back. And to Steve, one of my really good friends on the other side of the aisle, it's also great to have you in this position as well. your approach, let me just say this, and I hope I don't get you in trouble. The way you approach, you are one of the most well-respected members in the House, and that's on both sides. And at a time like this, we need it more than ever. So thank you for just being who you are and doing what you do. And to the two former senators, while I haven't had the opportunity to work with you before, you both enjoy great reputations, and I know that that was well-earned. Really interested to hear from all four of you today in terms of what you thought worked well on the respective commissions on which you served, and then also ultimately what didn't work about them. I appreciate, and I know Jody, my chairman, is sincere in his belief that a commission is the answer. That is not my position. While I'm attempting to keep an open mind about it, I'm more than a little bit skeptical that a commission would work, just frankly, given the past history of the last dozen years. I also think that whether it's a commission or a straight-up vote in Congress, what we're really avoiding is the ultimate decision. That's the ballgame, and not the process by which we get to resolve that ultimate question. We look, whether you take the date the CBO uses or the date that the Social Security trustees use, either 2033 or 2034, we cross the Rubicon when it comes to Social Security and go over in terms of insolvency, fall below being able to pay 75% of benefits. And before that date, we reach it on at least one of the Medicare trust funds as well. So we have some time, but not a lot of time. Ultimately, though, that big question is going to be, do we raise revenues for Social Security and Medicare, or do we cut benefits? I come down very clearly on the side of raising revenues. I don't make a secret about that, and I practice what I preach. I am the author on the House side with Sheldon Whitehouse on the Senate side of a bill that would raise enough revenues to Social Security, and the Joint Committee on Taxation has verified this, that would extend the life of the trust fund through the year 2100. And I want to share just some data, remarkable poll data that came back. This is from Navigator, June of 2023. This poll asked the American people, or those polled, which approach do you prefer? Raising taxes on rich and large corporations, including closing tax loopholes, and using that extra money to pay our bills, or cutting programs like Social Security and Medicare and using that money to pay our bills? The results were 82% to 7. I have never seen polling results like that. 82% opting for raising taxes on rich and large corporations, 7% cutting programs like Social Security and Medicare. So whether we talk about a commission or not a commission, ultimately we know that there's a choice that's going to have to be made, and in the end of the day, it's going to be members of Congress, elected officials, who will be voting on what that plan looks like. I will say on the positive about a commission, the 2018 commission on which you served, Mr. Chair, and on which you served, Chairman Yarmuth, there were some specific, and we've already launched a bipartisan look at budget reforms that could happen that would improve the process. Some of these passed out of a Senate committee, didn't ultimately become law. I'm really interested in following up on the work that you guys did, because I think there are some things there that we could turn into law and make permanently part of the process. So I'm especially interested in hearing about 2018. It wasn't so much a debt commission per se, it was more about budget process. And I think we have a real opportunity in this Congress, and we've talked about this before, to make that law, and we have support from at least 3/4 of the respective chairs and ranking members. But with that, welcome and welcome back, and I yield to the chair.
thank my friend and ranking member, and I agree, ultimately, we have to have the political courage to act, and that decision and responsibility is ours. I would hope a commission would foster some serious conversation and try to depoliticize that conversation, because we have to have it. Once again, in the interest of time, if any other member or organization has a written statement for the record, I'll hold the record open till the end of the day to accommodate those who may not have had a chance to prepare their statements. Once again, I'd like to also welcome our distinguished panel, and at this time, we'd like to yield 5 minutes to Senator Portman.
Great. Thank you, Chairman Arrington and Ranking Member Boyle. Thanks for your thoughtful comments, both of you. And Chairman, you laid out the challenge very well off the cuff. I appreciate your knowledge and commitment to this. I also appreciate you inviting Senator Conrad and me here. The last time I was in a hearing room with him, he was chairing it on Senate Budget Committee, and I was on this side of the table, and he was tough. So I'm really glad to have him on this side of the table today. As you noted, I spent a lot of part of my career working on these budget issues. I was a member of the Ways and Means Committee, but also a member of this committee, the Budget Committee, and the Budget Committee on the Senate side, and the Finance Committee, Joint Economic Committee. And yes, I was a member of the so-called super committee. It wasn't so super, being on that committee, but we tried. But in these roles, I've had an opportunity to see something, and that is the flaws of the current budget and appropriations process, and the rules by which we live, which both of you talked about, and the inability for Congress to address the impending fiscal crisis. Between my service between the House and Senate, I did serve as Director of the Office of Management and Budget, where I got to see the same thing on the administration side. I mean, there are a lot of tough issues there as well, and an inability to address the fiscal crisis from an executive branch perspective. Why? These are tough issues, a lot of political landmines. And my experience has led me to the conclusion that it's time to try something different. Time to try something that gives Congress and the American people a better tool to be able to, one, understand what's going on and have some trust in that, but also provide a balanced, bipartisan way forward. That's why I believe a commission with membership from members of Congress as well as outside experts is necessary and timely right now. I want to commend the members of this committee. I've looked at all your backgrounds. All of you have tackled this issue in one way or another. Everybody, it seems, on this committee just about has offered legislation with creative solutions to the crisis. Ranking member talked about some, as did the chairman. And a number of you on a bipartisan basis introduced legislation establishing a fiscal commission. Chairman Arrington included a fiscal commission in his recent budget resolution, which I appreciated. But Representatives Uzenga and Peters co-chair the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum and have introduced the Fiscal Commission Act, which was included in Speaker McCarthy's most recent continuing resolution. Didn't pass, but it got a vote. That FCA is also co-sponsored by Representatives Moore and Panetta. And I apologize if I've missed others in the committee who have also been similarly engaged. But this morning, we're going to hear from your former chair, Chairman Womack, who's going to have his own commission proposal. So I'm encouraged by all that, and I want to thank the members of this committee for taking a lead on that. You're well aware of the economic challenges and fiscal challenges that we face. I won't go into detail, but $33 trillion begins to add up to a huge issue, a tremendous and immoral burden on future generations. It does diminish our standing in the world. I've certainly seen that as I've traveled and talked to people. And of course, it negatively impacts our economy. It's no coincidence that we have had this debt and deficit grow and then be followed by a period of high inflation. We can talk about that later, but there's no question that that affects particularly long-term rates, and our constituents are all suffering from that right now. A properly structured bipartisan fiscal commission can build trust, expand knowledge, and yes, provide a little political cover to members of Congress who want to do the right thing. This is going to require establishing a fiscal metric, which won't be easy. You know, what's our goal? It's also going to require making some tough choices, including conducting a top-to-bottom review of all federal government spending, asking hard questions about the federal role, rooting out parochial spending that doesn't help the national interest, finding new revenue in a way that minimizes economic growth and opportunity impacts, reform, of course, of the critically important but currently unsustainable entitlement programs, as was talked about. And Chairman, you had it just right. We've got to save these programs, in essence. If we don't, as the ranking member said, Social Security benefits are going to be cut substantially as soon as 2033 or 2034. And of course, in general, entitlements will bankrupt the country. We all know that. In terms of budget reform, I think it'd be great if the commission also took a crack at that. and I think all of you would agree that's needed. This is all necessary, but I think the first step of any commission is to really just tell the American people the truth about what's going on. They know that something's not right. They know the current trajectory is unsustainable, but they're looking for an honest assessment and an honest dialogue about the way forward, not a partisan one, but one that is right down the middle. I think that is maybe the most important part of the commission. There are a lot of valid structures for a commission. Some of you, again, have your own proposals, and I'm not saying that one is better than the other, but I do think having members of Congress and some external folks involved who are real experts is important. I think to reduce some of the politics, the commission should report during the likely lame duck session of Congress after the 2024 elections. That's assuming this commission can get up and going soon, because I think it's going to take that much time to do it right. The question was, what's worked and what hasn't worked. I think the law establishing the commission should create fast-track consideration culminating with a vote without amendment for a solution approved by a qualified majority, whatever that is, of the membership. I think that's the important thing of doing a statutory commission as opposed to others that have been tried, like Simpson-Bowles. What's worked, what hasn't worked? BRAC has worked. This base realignment and closure process. There have been 5 BRAC rounds, as some of you know. Estimated each round created an average of $12 billion in savings. That was tough going, but it did work in that sense. Another model would be the 81 Greenspan Commission. It was a bipartisan group of experts and members of Congress, respected members of Congress, saved the federal government over $165 billion in the first 7 years, extended the life of Social Security by 30 years. That's not bad. They said it was going to extend it for longer than that, but 30 years is not bad. On Simpson-Bowles, we just mentioned that. Their comprehensive package of reforms, as you know, was not passed in the Congress, but it was a success in a way because many of its proposals did become law. The Center for a Responsible Federal Budget has estimated that by 2015, Congress had enacted around 60% of those reductions in spending, those reforms that were proposed. So it did make a difference, and Senator Conrad can talk more about that. But we can learn from its failures, too, what didn't work. It was established by executive order and without congressional approval, so there was no forcing mechanism to ensure a vote would occur. Also, the commission said you had to get 15 of 18 members to agree. That was the majority. That's just too high. And it turned out to be a standard that was too hard to meet. So look, when Americans take a look at us today here in Congress and Washington, they often despair, as what they see is deep divisions. And I wish more could tune into events like this today, where I think you're seeing between Republicans and Democrats the ability to look toward the future together, to collaborate in search of a solution that's best for the country. So thanks to the committee members for your willingness to take on the fiscal challenge and to look at new approaches, including a bipartisan fiscal commission. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Chairman Conrad, we yield 5 minutes to you, good sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, members of the committee. First, want to recognize the important work you all have done. Congressman Boyle, you've advanced a serious proposal, and it takes guts to do that. And Chairman Arrington, you have certainly led the charge on having a commission so that we can wrestle with these issues with a mechanism that will allow bipartisan cooperation. So I want to recognize that. I also want to take a minute to recognize Chairman Yarmuth, somebody who I have enormously high regard for. I thought he was an outstanding committee chairman, and my former intern has succeeded him in his congressional seat, Morgan McGarvey. So I'm delighted to be with him today. And Chairman Womack, who is known on both sides of the aisle as someone of great integrity. We admire that. And I can say on both sides of the aisle, people recognize the job he did as Budget Committee Chairman. He's a serious member. And on a personal note, if I can say, Jimmy Panetta, your father was one of my all-time favorites. He was Budget Committee Chairman. I worked with him closely when he was the President's Chief of Staff. Really one of my favorite members. I've given a formal statement and understand that'll be made part of the record. I thought I'd just summarize and going forward. First of all, I believe we've reached a defining moment. Our fiscal affairs are completely off track. There's one thing I think we could have bipartisan agreement on, we are off in the weeds, and we've got to get back on track. Deficits are rising, and from a already too high level. Our debt is now over $33 trillion, as Senator Portman indicated. I should also say that when he was head of OMB, he and I were having discussions about how we could put together a bipartisan plan to get us back on track at that time, and I found him to be really a remarkably good partner in that effort. Our debt is now over 122% of our GDP. CBO tells us we're headed for a debt of 192% of GDP. There's almost no economist that wouldn't say that challenges the fiscal integrity of the United States. Considerable part of that debt is held by foreign powers. That clearly compromises our global independence. Rising deficits and debt are an economic and a national security concern. The effect on the economy is really quite clear. We see heightened inflation, surging interest rates. That's damaging our economic growth and future income. To those who say deficits and debt don't matter, I say, look to history. Ask the Germans after World War I, when they had to take a wheelbarrow full of cash to buy a pair of shoes. And ask them for what happened leading to World War II. Look to our own history. Clinton administration balanced the budget. The economic benefits that flowed from that are clear. Record job creation, record economic growth, record reductions in poverty. Those are facts. Of course, deficits and debt matter. They may not matter immediately, but over time, it is clear and compelling that they matter. Rising debt means rising interest costs as interest rates rise as well. All we have to do is look at our three major trust funds. Social Security, trustees say it will be insolvent by 2033, meaning a cut to every Social Security beneficiary of 24%. Medicare, trustees say will be insolvent by 2031. If you don't have the revenue, the benefits will have to be reduced. That is the law. Highways, Highway Trust Fund headed for insolvency in 2028, requiring a cut of 47%. So, what could be more clear? We are headed for serious results if we don't act. We need to act now. The political system seems ill-equipped. Parties are too divided, special interests too strong, incentives to attack anyone who proposes solutions too inviting. The alternative, I believe, is to have a bipartisan fiscal commission. It's worked in the past. The Greenspan Commission, 1981, did extend the solvency of Social Security for more than 30 years. The BRAC process saved tremendously on the accounts of our national defense and improved military efficiency and preparedness. And Simpson-Bowles, although the total recommendations were not adopted, it did serve as a foundation for the Budget Control Act of 2011. The strength of a commission is to bridge partisan divides. It provides a mechanism for both sides to work together to solve problems. To be effective, I believe everything's got to be on the table. And by everything, I mean everything. Entitlements, domestic discretionary, revenue. The longer we wait, the more draconian the solutions are going to have to be. The longer we wait, the more draconian the solutions are going to have to be. That's a mathematical certainty. I also believe a commission to be effective has got to be truly bipartisan. Members from both chambers, both parties, outside experts, and I believe the White House. I thought that was one of the strengths of Simpson Bowles, was to have the White House involved. After all, you've got to have all stakeholders. Everybody's going to have to be involved in the final getting the legislation passed and signed. I also think it's critical that the commission assure an up or down vote on the product. We're at a critical juncture. A commission may be the best shot we have to help us get back on track. The parties' divide appears intractable, just as our fiscal trajectory seems unsustainable. But all parties can be part of the solution. I believe a bipartisan commission is the most promising opportunity to begin this work. Thank you for holding this important hearing.
Chairman, thank you so much. We now yield 5 minutes to Chairman Womack.
I thank the chairman and the ranking member, and man, what an awesome, very humbling experience this is for me to sit with these luminaries, these distinguished gentlemen from the Senate, Senator Portman, Senator Conrad, and my dear, dear, dear friend, John Yarmuth, and the work that he did and the work that we did and the absolute cooperation and respect that we gave each other. Mr. Chairman, I am so proud of you. For those that don't know, when I was asked to co-chair the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process Reform, when Speaker Ryan called me in his office and asked me to do this, I said I'm willing. He gave me the structure that had been provided for by law, and I knew that there were going to be 4 members of the House, 4 of the Senate, each party. And I said, but in order to do this, I'm going to just have one request, and that is that this is like hiring a coach. I need to bring an assistant with me that I know and can trust. And he said, who do you want? And I said, well, I want Jody Arrington. But he's a freshman. I want Jody Arrington. And Jody, you never disappoint me. I'm so very proud of you. And Brendan Boyle, remarkable person, dear friend, and the work that you're doing. So thank you. And to the other panelists, some that served with me when I was chairman of this committee that are still here today, and I'm eternally grateful for the work that all of you do and have done. I'm encouraged by the recent public support for the Fiscal Commission that would address the challenges our nation is facing. And as has been mentioned, some of the themes that I will trumpet here this morning have already been covered and deserve to be repeated. One of the biggest challenges is the size of the sovereign debt and the fact that it is growing. Truly one of the greatest threats to American prosperity. And while some would argue the greatest threat, I would hasten to remind everybody in here that in my strong opinion, the greatest threat to the republic as we know it is the division in the body politic. And Exhibit A is what is going on right now. And this Congress is going to have to muster the courage to fix this. And we can no longer hide behind the politics of everything. We have to come together. It is a national security issue. It is an economic security issue. And the American public is relying on us to fix this. We are having long and drawn-out food fights, as I call it, over discretionary spending. This has been going on since I've come to Congress. That is not our problem. It is what we fight most about on spending, but it is not our problem. Without reforms, without considering everything on the table, as Senator Conrad has just articulated, the trust funds of Medicare and Social Security, the 2 biggest programs, face insolvency. And we need to tackle the fiscal dysfunction, and I believe a fiscal commission is part of that. Now, Mr. Chairman, I will also tell you that in order for this to be successful, we have to win the hearts and minds of the people we serve. And somehow, we have to make our constituents subject matter experts on our situation, because it is not happening to them as we speak, unless, of course, they're recognizing the inflationary spirals that are happening, the fact that now home mortgage rates are in the 8 handle. That's when it begins to dawn on people, but then it becomes too late. So we have to find a way to educate the people we serve. So I'm a strong believer in a fiscal State of the Union. In my opinion, a fiscal State of the Union would serve a far greater purpose than our annual State of the Union. Now, this Joint Select Committee that Jody and I and my ranking member served on did a lot of great work. And the good thing about the work is, while it didn't get across the finish line, it's still great work. And it still provides at least a blueprint for where we can go from here. The ideas and the changes and the reforms that were advocated for, biennial budgeting, annual appropriations, annual reconciliation, all of those things, and others that didn't make it into the proposal, they're still fresh. And they will still work if we can just muster the courage to take them on. But that final proposal, developed with input from members and all stakeholders across the board, the co-chair and I agreed to the base text. Additional amendments were added. Bipartisan ideas were found. Proposals were explored for future reformers, and we went to vote. I don't know if you remember this, Mr. Yarmuth, but the request was that we needed to pause on the vote because of expedited procedures in the Senate and get some assurance that nothing was going to be placed into the proposal that had nothing to do with the proposal. You remember. We never got that assurance. And so when the final vote was taken, as I recall, there were 5 Republicans, the minimum needed, that were for it, and there were 2 Democrats, one of them sitting right here to my left, that were for it, but 4 members on the Democrat side voted present. They loved the ideas, but they needed assurance that this was not going to be a vehicle by which other non-germane issues were going to be attached. That's the problem with Washington, and that's what we need to fix. I've strayed from my prepared remarks because I get really emotional about these things. But I will say, as Senator Conrad said, that whatever we do and however we proceed, every single possibility has to be on the table. For to remove a proposal or an option from the table only increases the draconian cost, if you will, of the remaining items. And Senator Portman said that the good news is we have a little time, which is the absolute worst thing you can say to the United States Congress. I will finish this way. This is a matter of urgency. It is imperative that the Congress begin to act immediately, and the failure to do so could indeed signal the end of the Republic as we know it. With that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back the balance of my time.
Chairman Womack, thank you for your remarks, and I will now yield to the good gentleman from the Commonwealth, Chairman Yarmuth, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Arrington, Ranking Member Boyle, members of the committee. Let me echo and underline the kind comments that Mr. Womack has made and Senator Conrad and others, and say it is a great honor for me to be part of this panel, even though I'm going to be that proverbial object in the punch bowl. And say that when, I was Steve Womack's ranking member, and then he was my ranking member, and I can't imagine having had a more mutually respectful, collegial, and serious partnership than the two of us have had, and still have. And I was proud to come and say a few remarks when his portrait was unveiled here, and I hope he will return when I am here to unveil my portrait. But anyway, I'm honored to be here before the committee I once chaired to discuss proposals to create another, and I say that with purposeful skepticism, Commission on the Federal Fiscal Condition. Having served in Congress during a period that saw at least 4 different attempts to assist Congress with doing one of its most fundamental jobs, I can only characterize this new commission proposal as the proverbial definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. As has been discussed, I spent a large amount of time in 2018 as a member of the Joint Select Committee on Budget and Appropriations Process Reform under the very thoughtful leadership of Mr. Womack. I was constantly impressed with the seriousness of the committee's discussions and hearings. Many well-meaning people from outside and inside of Congress offered their thoughts on how we could reform our budgeting process and appropriations process, primarily, I think, with the implicit goal of reducing our annual deficits and the national debt. While some of the other members of that committee, and we have 2 of them here, may take issue with my evaluation, I believe the process illuminated one fairly obvious but unavoidable truth. The problem is not the process, it's the people. In other words, if members of Congress are not willing, and this phrase has already been used, to muster the determination and courage to take on our fiscal challenges, even the best ideas will never be implemented. I would argue the same conclusion could be reached about the Domenici-Rivlin Task Force and Simpson-Bowles Commission. And even those who think the 2011 Budget Control Act was effective must remember that the only reason it was enacted was because it avoided a default on our debt. And that virtually every year we waived the budget caps because they were impractical and unpopular, and there was bipartisan relief when that law expired in 2021. Plus, the commission established under that law could not reach a consensus on any new course of action. And by the way, the national debt doubled during the 10 years the budget caps of the 2011 Act were in effect. Of course, every one of these efforts stems from the presumption that our debt and deficits are unsustainable. I heard that argument every one of the 16 years I served in this body. I am sure that back during the Lincoln administration, when the national debt reached $1 billion, people were warning that they were leaving an unsustainable burden on their grandchildren. I know they were saying that when the debt reached $1 trillion during the Reagan years. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of one grandchild who has ever been asked to repay a penny of that debt. I have 2 young grandsons, and the last thing I worry about for them is that they will have to pay back some of the national debt. If you believe, as most do, that it would be better for us not to have trillion-dollar annual deficits and $33 trillion in debt, the course of action is not a mystery. You either cut spending or raise revenues or both. Doing that is Congress's job and not a commission's or task forces, not even the bipartisan bicameral committee we had in 2018. So I'd like to offer some other suggestions. Why not have the Oversight Committee actually do oversight on some of the more expensive government activities and see where money can be saved, rather than holding wasteful hearings on Hunter Biden and his laptop? Why not have the Ways and Means Committee meaningfully explore the Social Security and Medicare programs to see how their fiscal conditions can be strengthened? And let me say as an aside on Social Security, everybody says there are only 3 courses of action on Social Security: raise revenues, raise the retirement age, or reduce benefits. There's another answer. The only reason the trust fund is an issue is because the law says that benefits have to be paid out of the trust fund. Congress can change the law, say that benefits are paid out of the general fund. Then the trust fund issue goes away, like that. There's another way that Congress enact, because Congress basically sets the interest rate that the Social Security Trust Fund gets from the government. So the premiums come in, Social Security payments come in, Treasury issues bonds to the trust fund. They're not normal government bonds. They're bonds of special issue. They can't be marketed, and they bear an interest rate that Congress sets the formula for. Congress can change that. So there are options available to us, but it takes serious thoughts on the ways of Congress. What else can we do? The Energy and Commerce Committee can do the same thing with Medicaid. And while they're at that one, they can passionately look at the oil subsidies that cost us billions. Same with sugar subsidies that not only have direct costs, but enormous indirect healthcare costs. And finally, maybe this committee can actually analyze the national debt issue to determine whether the debt we have and will have is really unsustainable or not. And how can we judge that moving forward? It can't be just looking at a graph with constantly rising line and getting scared. One final thought is that commissions and task forces don't have souls. Hopefully, members of Congress do. A government without a soul is not a functioning government, regardless of how much or how little it costs. I look forward to your questions.
I thank the chairman, and we need to make sure that we have attainable aspirations in this committee. So to suggest that we're going to need members of Congress to have a soul is a really difficult start to this conversation. I'm not going to ask any questions. I want to make a comment, and then I'm going to defer to my colleagues. It is so unfortunate, but our conferences have called meetings at 11 o'clock, both sides. And I hate that because this is the beginning of a very important conversation. And I just want you to know that my desire and what I will work towards accomplishing is inviting both the Democrats and Republicans in our conference more broadly in an auditorium to have a bipartisan discussion and panel Q&A with you all here. So we'll have more time for discussion. But we have to break. I'll probably stay till 11:15. Some members will leave, so just understand that's what that's about. I'm going to resist actually making any more comments. I appreciate the diverse opinions and the contrarian views. Now, let's debate and let's seek the counsel of our gentleman in front of us. I'm going to defer to Mr. McClintock for my set of questions. Can I do that? Can he ask my questions and I'll just go?
I think so, right? Yeah,
Let me do that. I yield 5 minutes, but let's try to make it as quickly as we can to let everybody have their time to ask a question.
Well, I'll
Mr.
try not to
McClintock.
take 5 minutes. I don't want to shock everybody, especially myself, but I agree with what John Yarmuth said. He's either gotten a lot wiser since he left Congress, or I've gotten a lot dumber, but one way or another, we've had a meeting of the minds. Shakespeare put it best: the fault, dear Brutus, lies not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are underlings. You know, all the CYA commissions we can think of won't work without people willing to make hard decisions. There's no substitute for leadership and courage and common sense. The budget process only works when the House leadership is willing to exercise that courage and common sense and make fiscal responsibility an absolute priority and insist on it throughout the House. Under Newt Gingrich and John Kasich, we had that leadership, and we had that determination, and we had a president who was willing to work with them, and we balanced the budget 4 years in a row and set this country back on course toward fiscal balance. The chairman's correct. We haven't done our jobs. So it's just easier to blame the process and now propose to hand that hot potato off to an unelected commission, presumably exercising superhuman wisdom that we haven't been able to summon. And when our constituents complain, we just have to say, hey, it's in the hands of a bipartisan commission, and they'll figure it out. Well, we missed the central point. The ultimate bipartisan commission in this nation is called the Congress. And this Congress, as imperfect as it is where these decisions must be made. Passing the buck is simply not the answer because the buck stops here. A dollar cannot be spent by this government until and unless this House says that it can be spent. So there's no substitute for Congress, and if it hasn't worked recently, we need to look at ourselves and not farm it out to others. There is no shortage of experts and think tanks, left, right, and center, with every conceivable solution to our problems. Some are really good, some are really bad, and it is our job to know the difference and to act accordingly. There's been a House rule since 1836 that forbids any expenditure of funds not authorized by law. That provision requires exactly the oversight and review that Mr. Yarmuth recommends. But we always waive that rule, throw billions of dollars at programs whose authorization has expired decades ago, and then go about our business as if nothing has happened. The budget process that's in place offers a logical, step-by-step process for responsible, serious budgeting if we would simply use it. And it did work when Congress used it and insisted on it. It's true, we're badly divided by partisanship because the American people are badly divided by partisanship. And what is Congress but a reflection of the people? Madison said if every member of Congress were a Socrates, it would still behave like a mob. Our fiscal situation is dire because of bad decisions made here over many years, and it can only be corrected here. It's becoming so dire that it cannot be ignored much longer. Reality, I think, is about to catch up with us, and we're going to, as Lincoln once said, need to rise with the occasion, to disenthrall ourselves and then save our country. Anything you'd like to add, Mr. Yarmuth? I never thought I'd be inviting this, but your testimony is spot on.
Well, I appreciate that. No, I never thought we would agree on anything either. Yeah, and I think, and Steve Womack mentioned this as well. If you go back and look at Greenspan, you're talking about 1981. It was a different world in 1981 in terms of the geopolitical climate in this country. We had liberals and conservatives in both parties, so there was always something you could find common ground with in the other party. That doesn't exist anymore, and on most issues we default to our party's position. And we don't take the time to really...
Yeah, but the process does work after a fashion. The reason we built that beautiful building was to do one thing and one thing only. It was to talk out our differences. And we need to get back to that, and not in a commission, but here.
We absolutely do. And we can't... I haven't been out of it so long that I can't say we still. But Congress can be the role models that will help the people change their perspective.
I thank the gentleman from California. His time has expired. I now recognize Ranking Member Boyle from Pennsylvania for any questions.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Chairman, first, I've quite a laundry list here, so bear with me. I ask unanimous consent to include into the record the following. A statement for the record for Max Rickman, President and CEO of the National Committee to Preserve Social Security and Medicare. Congressional testimony statement for the record from AFG, the American Federation of Government Employees. A letter to both of us from AFSCME. a letter for the record from the Bipartisan Policy Center, a piece from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities written by Sharon Parrott and Joel Friedman, and finally, a letter to the both of us from Strengthen Social Security.
With regard to all the above, without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And following your lead and given the unfortunate timing that both of our caucuses have called for internal meetings beginning at 11, I will defer my questions then and yield to Mr. Higgins. But before I do, I'll just say one thing. I want to underscore something that Chairman Womack said, and it's beyond just this committee. Our internal divisions as a Congress and increasingly as a country is a massive national security threat. And all of us as elected officials have a real responsibility, a solemn responsibility, to not play into that or exacerbate it, but to attempt to heal the divide. Because if not, we're going down a very dangerous road. And with that, I will yield to Mr. Higgins.
We'll give Mr. Higgins his full 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member, and thank you, distinguished panel here. I would prefer to look at this issue from a position of strength. The United States is 5% of the world's population. We're 25% of the world's economy. You look at every measure, and it's reported clearly in The Economist magazine about the growth of American prosperity within a world context. In 1990, America represented 40% of the wealth of the top 7 economies in the world. Today, it's 58%. You look at productivity, you look at the workforce in America, it far exceeds that in the last 20 years of Europe, of China, of Japan. And the American economy does best when we invest in the growth of the American economy. So when we look at debt and deficit, we have to look at the contemporary history. And America grows down its debt and deficit when the economy grows. So finding ways to expand the middle class is essential to dealing with debt and deficit over the longer term. You know, Peter Drucker, the great Harvard economist in the 1960s and 70s, said that the whole purpose of creating an economy is to create a middle class. They pay our taxes, they fight our wars, they protect our neighborhoods, they teach our children, they take care of our people in terms of health care. And the strength of a society generally is viewed based on the size of your middle class. So I think that is essentially important. You think about all of the difficulty that we've overcome as a nation, particularly in the age of the pandemic. You know, nobody was lining up for Russian and Chinese vaccines. They were lining up for American vaccines and the messenger RNA technology that was developed with taxpayer dollars. With taxpayer dollars over a 30-year period. It's the genetic material that tells a cell to make a protein, which is the active ingredient in the vaccine. It saved 1 million people and helped cure another 45 million people. 12, the top universities in the world, of the 15 top universities in the world, are in the United States. We are a dynamic economy. We are an innovative economy. We are a destination for people all over the world that want to experience the American dream. And when they succeed, we succeed as a nation. So I appreciate all the talk about how horrible things are. But let me tell you something. They ain't all that horrible. And Bloomberg Analytics in February of this year had 15 economists focus in on 15 areas of the American economy. They said, not me, that Joe Biden is on his way to being the greatest jobs-producing president in the history of the United States. The unemployment rate is at a 54-year low. Last year at this time, inflation was at 8.1%. Now it's down to about 3% and continues to come down. So Democrats and Republicans, many of whom here profess to be concerned only about the American people and the American economy, and I believe that. But I think all of us would be much better off focusing in on the strength of America as a basis from which to grow and to deal with our problems and stop pointing fingers, because historically, each party has played a role in the responsibility for the decline. But each party should also be embracing and celebrating the great economy that is built, and that of which is America. So, Mr. Yarmuth, I would say to you, as the former chair of this committee, your views about how we can use the strength of the American economy and the dynamic nature of the American economy within the context of the global economy to continue to grow and create opportunities for the American people.
Well, I appreciate your comments, Mr. Higgins, and what I would say is, I think when you look at the American economy, this is the question that everybody should ask when we're talking about debt and deficits, because $33 trillion, the vast majority of that $33 trillion represents investments that the government has made in the American people. That money has gone into the economy, it's gone into the American people's hands, and until the Fed began raising interest rates just a year and a half or so ago, you can make a pretty strong case that the national debt grew by a significant amount without any negative impact on the economy, on the strength of the dollar, on interest rates, and/or inflation. And the pandemic changed everything and created a situation which will take years to analyze. But we went from basically 2008 to 2020 with a huge growth in the federal debt, and again, no negative impact on any of those key factors. So that's why I suggest that we really have to, before we start talking about whether the debt and deficits are problems, we ought to actually try to get a really good look at what is sustainable and what's not. And we are a sovereign currency. We can print all the money we want to serve the people whom we serve. And so I don't know what the right measurement is. Japan has national debt that's 240% of their GDP. They issue bonds from their government with statutory 0% interest rate, and people buy them. So we can answer the question, why are we paying interest on the money we borrow? And why do we borrow money anyway? We can print it and put it in the Treasury. So I just think there's a lot of analysis that we need to do to look at how the money system works in this country and whether we really have something to worry about. And again, with the strong economy, I think you can make a pretty strong case that our debt is not holding us back at this point.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentleman's time has expired. We're going to move to 3-minute Q&A period for each of the members that are remaining. Again, I know there are a lot of folks in here who wanted to share their thoughts and ask you questions, but we'll have to do this again. Mr. Grothman from Wisconsin.
I guess we are a divided country. I heard some of the comments from the other side of the aisle. I don't know if they show up, some of the people I hang around with, they say signs of America's greatness or its universities and its COVID response. I'll tell you, there's a whole nother world out there that does not feel that our universities are right now what they should be. And I think the COVID response is good. And as far as helping the middle class, I think the difficulty in buying a house or buying a car today are about the toughest I can remember in my lifetime. It really threatens the middle class. But I'll ask a question to him. We'll talk to Mr. Portman. When I look at the problems we have, first of all, I agree with Mr. Yarmuth. On Social Security, we should begin to look at the general fund. I kind of look at the budget as a whole. As far as the people saying, I think Social Security is the one thing we can't cut because we've made certain promises to the American people. I know there's some politicians who like to brag, look at me, I'm so tough, I'm going to cut Social Security. I think it's the one thing we can cut. What I'm going to ask you, whether in your experience here, people have all talked about getting back to our Constitution. And I realize it might be a relatively small overall percent of our budget, some of the programs, but when I look at all the people around here who think it's the federal government's to deal with housing, or the federal government's responsibility to deal with education, or income transfer payments, or commerce, it just drives me up a wall, because of course our forefathers never would have guessed to this degree we get involved in these things. In any of the things that you've been involved with, have you looked what the deficit would be if we just transferred all this stuff back to the states and said, look at constituents, these may be good programs, they may aren't, they may not be, but we are broke, and you should talk to your state legislature about them and see where we'd wind up if we took all these programs and just said, here, states, you decide whether you want to raise the revenue for them.
Well, first, thanks for your good question. You saw in my testimony, I talked about looking at the role of the federal government. And that's for the reason you just stated. It's grown dramatically, as you know, over time, to the point that our spending as a country has gone from when I last testified before this committee, which was about 16 years ago, to today. We're spending $2.6 trillion then, we're spending about $6.3 trillion now.
Right. Do you think the American public is persuadable that there's certain things that are state and local, the federal government's got to get rid of, and we balance the budget that way?
Well, I think there are, but we have to remind ourselves that although we ought to do that, and I said that in my testimony and I believe it, about 70% of the spending today is on autopilot. And so it's not part of that 30%. Now that includes interest on the debt, but significantly, as was said earlier.
Oh, some of that autopilot was unconstitutional too, but go ahead.
Yeah. So, I mean, but we just have to realize that we're not going to solve the problem there, but it's a big part of what I think any commission ought to do is do a top-to-bottom review of everything and look at what the federal role is. And in some cases, the states should take a bigger responsibility, and I think, you know, you look historically, that's been the case. I will also say, in terms of your comment on interest rates, you're absolutely right, and it's not just a coincidence. I mean, look at what Fitch and Moody have said. Fitch has already downgraded our debt. Moody has threatened to do so, and that raises long-term rates to the point that, as you indicate, we now have constituents, you have constituents who are paying 8% on their mortgage, and their car payments are out of control. So this is directly related to this problem. Both Fitch and Moody's, by the way, said that dysfunction in Washington and the fiscal crisis, the fiscal impending crisis, is what influenced them to say, I'm not sure this American debt, you know, ought to get a high rating anymore. So it directly relates to interest rates and therefore to your constituents and others who are suffering in this economy because of high inflation and high interest rates.
Thank you.
Chair Necker now recognizes Ms. Schakowsky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I admire the tone that has predominated in this meeting. I do not feel a sanguine. And it seems to me as we talk about a fiscal commission, and I agree with my dear friend, John Yarmuth, that when we have a functioning Congress, when we have a functioning House of Representatives, enough tools to be able to deal with these questions. I want to focus mostly on Social Security and Medicare, which always seems to come up as a target. Along with, we were both on the Simpson-Bowles Commission, Senator. I have my own position because I was worried about Social Security and Medicare, offered my own proposal. We didn't get one at all. But you know, Social Security right now is so modest. What we're talking about, an average of $17,536 a year, and about $2,000 less for women. So modest, barely making it. And Medicare right now, there are 57 million Americans, older Americans, and 8 million people with disabilities that rely on it. And I agree totally with our ranking member that what we ought to do if we come up with a fiscal answer is to ask the wealthiest Americans to pay a bit more, not to cut. What we call entitlement, really? Social Security, people pay every single paycheck to get that money when they retire, and to call it an entitlement is just absolutely wrong. So I want to ask you, my friend John Yarmuth, our former chair of this committee, what is your view on how we deal with those issues that affect everyday Americans in the deepest sense, and what do you think that we should do?
Well, I certainly don't have all the answers, but, I think, again, as a Congress, we, in my 16 years here, we spent virtually no time actually analyzing the way government operates, the services that we provide, the funding mechanisms. I was on the Oversight Committee my first term in Congress. We never did oversight on any one program. We were busy investigating, and I had a ball doing it. I loved it, but investigating the Bush administration. And then, of course, we had the financial crisis in 2008, and we spent a lot of time on that. But this Congress does not do nearly enough to analyze the activities that we do. And I think, we all complain about taxes. I know a lot of people resist raising taxes, but we have one of the lowest tax burdens as a federal government than any developed country in the world. It's politically, we don't like doing that. We have a complicated problem because we have some states that have very heavy tax burdens, some that have none. So that adds to the total impact on our citizens. But by and large, again, the $33 trillion that we are in debt is investments we made in the people. And the people rely on those investments. They rely on Social Security, as you said. 2/3 of the people on Social Security who get Social Security, that represents more than half their income. A third of them, it's their entire income. And I think the one thing we have to look at also is, in terms of Medicare, there are actually some very positive signs going on in Medicare as we drive prescription drug prices down. We actually, research is making a lot of diseases that were very costly more manageable and so forth. So again, I think it's just Congress's responsibility to spend more time focused on what we do and how we do it.
Thank you.
Thank you, and I'll now recognize myself for some brief comments. First, I'd like to submit for the record, for unanimous consent, several organizations have provided input, including the Committee for Responsible Federal Budget, of the importance of a bipartisan fiscal commission. In my second term, so I ascended to the chair pretty quickly. This is the only reason I'm here. I sat and watched for 20 years. I agree. I absolutely agree. This is the place we should fix this. The Congress is the bipartisan group that should actually do this. I'm not going to sit around and watch for another 20 years, us not be able to do it. A bipartisan fiscal commission will not be easy for any single person on this side of the aisle or this side of the aisle to vote for. But the fundamental problem is that we haven't had a chance to vote on it yet. The members on the lower part of the dais, we all want to fix this. We all want to be a part of the solution here, right? We need a catalyst to get it so it comes to the floor. And as I've talked in every speaker debate, the battle that I've had, I didn't expect to have so many conversations about this in 9 months, but every single time I've said, we have to have a debt commission because Congress has failed to do this. I sat there for 20 years as I was kind of like watching, right? Like, what in the world? Why can't we get this figured out? Utah has a rainy day fund. We have a balanced budget every single year. And I get federal government is different than state government. I get it, folks. But we have not fixed the problem. We knew that that baby boomers were going to start retiring at a very rapid rate in 2008. And so what did we do the years prior to that? We bickered back and forth and we didn't solve the problem. We did not prepare for when baby boomers were going to start to enroll in Social Security and Medicare at a rapid rate. And if you look at it, from 94 to 08, there was a few 100,000 that were added. From 08 to beyond, it's like 2 million almost a year, right? So we've got a fundamental problem that we didn't prepare for. This fiscal commission is going to force us. It's going to bypass leadership. It's going to get to the floor and actually be able to vote it on. And guess what? All the work that was done from all of you on this panel will be included in it because you had amazing thought, you had the right direction. We just have to make action happen. And it has to be uncomfortable for every single one of us. Senator Portman, the question that I did have when I had 5 minutes, I don't have as much. Anything to the structure of this that will create the right type of outcomes that we want to do? Like, could you speak to anything that you've watched this from past? You have an amazing record of working in a bipartisan manner to solve some of these problems. Anything that you would like to just mention that needs to be structurally sound with this commission so we can actually get something done?
Well, first, I appreciate your passion for this issue, and specifically the Fiscal Commission, but much more importantly, that you realize that Congress has not been able to solve these problems. To your colleagues who've said, why can't we just do it? We've tried. We've tried. And people say, well, when John Kasich was chairman of this committee, we had a balanced budget. I was on the committee during that time. I was the leadership rep to the Budget Committee. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an entirely different situation. Forget the fact that Republicans and Democrats were working better together. We were not in the fiscal hole we're in now. I mean, we're talking about a $2 trillion deficit likely this year versus a zero deficit. Think about that. I mean, we were looking then at about 60% GDP. Today, 120% of GDP. It's a totally different ballgame. So we're in a situation, I believe, where if we don't fix it, we're going to have to make some very tough adjustments to these really important entitlement programs. But our economy, the interest rates, and the inflation over time is going to eat up more and more of our paychecks from our constituents. But interest rates alone, think about this. If we're talking about 8% long-term rates, what's that going to do to the debt and deficit? It just explodes it. So we've got to do something. And my sense is yours, which is we need a catalyst. I guess the worst case scenario is the commission, works on a bipartisan basis, is not able to come up with something, but at least we've got this issue raised and we're talking about it. The second worst case is it comes to the floor of the House and Senate and can't pass. At least you're talking about it. At least it forces you to deal with this issue. And I think all of you in this committee ought to be for that because this is the committee that wants that issue to be front and center. And again, I said earlier, I applaud you all because a lot of you have taken a lead on these issues and come up with your own policy proposals. I see Mr. Peters about that. I want to hear from him because he's one of them that has. Takes some guts to do it. And I appreciate your passion. Hope you continue it.
I'll reserve some of my questions later. I'm now the chair, so I guess I can
should go to
do
5
whatever
minutes.
I want. And we'll go to Representative Peters from California.
I hate when they say something I do takes guts. That's probably a bad signal. But I appreciate all other witnesses being here, and I'll try to deal with my 3 minutes as well. Look, I'm frustrated with our inability to deal with this in this Congress. I came to Congress to work on things like that. I thought it would work better. The budgets and 75% of the Congress, this is how new we are, came in with me in 2013 or after Simpson Bowles. So they're not familiar in the way you said, Senator, that we talk about these things. That was sort of common parlance maybe back in 2011. We all post-date that. And since I've been here, the budgets are political. As a difficult member, you have a difficult race. When I had a difficult race, the instruction was always to vote against it. Mr. Arrington produced the budget. It's a political document. I think we just have to acknowledge that. If we do budgets at all, sometimes we don't even do budgets, right? So it is not working here. It's just not working. And I don't think the American people would give us much talk back about that. So yes, we have the power to do it, but we don't seem to have the will to do it. And I'm worried we don't have the capacity to do it. I think we've gotten out of the mechanics of doing deals here that seem natural to me, even as a trial lawyer, is to settle cases. That was part of what we did. That doesn't happen here. It just doesn't happen here. Then we'll make speeches about what the best answer is, and then we'll go walk our own way. We've made our record. We haven't made progress. It is a different situation here. Now we're borrowing almost $2 trillion a year just to pay our expenses. We're putting groceries on the credit card. And as a result of that, this year we're spending $663 billion in interest. That's not investment. That's not money that's going into any good use. That's paying for what we already did in the past By 2027, we'll be spending more on interest than we are in defense. As a Democrat, I really want to do the child tax credit. I can tell you, I think that's one of the most important anti-poverty, pro-children investments we can do. It's expensive. I can't afford it if we spend all the money on interest. I can't make that argument. I also say finally that the answer has got to be bipartisan. It just is obvious to me that politics is as much of a fact here as science or numbers or arithmetic or anything else. You need 218, you need 60. And here's why I think Democrats should be interested in a commission like the one I proposed, but there are other variations. One is on Medicare and Social Security. I think that there are people who want to cut Medicare and Social Security. I'm on Jan's side. On Jan Schakowsky's side. I want to preserve that program. But current law doesn't provide for general fund funding. Current law doesn't provide for the good integrity proposal that Mr. Boyle proposed or that Mr. Larson's proposed. Current law is going to cut benefits by 23-25% when the lines cross. And if you want to cut Medicare and Social Security, what you do is nothing, because you're already on track to win that battle, if that's what your real goal is. If you want to save it, the sooner you do it, the better off we are. I don't see that happening without a commission. That's why we have to have it. The other thing is finally on tax cuts. I railed against the Republican tax cuts in 2017, which were projected and have proven out to cost $1.9 trillion, right? Which, by the way, every year we're borrowing that amount. So that wasn't all that much of an unusual event. And we're going to see the same pressure from Republicans to extend those in 2025. And if we don't have a cop on the beat, this commission, we're going to have the same conversation where I'm told that these things pay for themselves. I'm tired of that. Democrats need to push back on that. To do that, we need people in the room dealing with facts. I don't see a way to do it other than a commission. I hope we'll get around to that. I really think it's the only practical way to deal with this problem, because I think we've proven over 20 years that this doesn't work. And people come to me now and they say, back in 1993, we did it this way. Back in 1983, we did it this way. Are you kidding me? This is not that place. And I've been here long enough to see. We're not making deals. We're not talking facts. We're really, I'm gonna say finally, this chairman and this ranking member have been really good, set a good example for how to not be performative. But we're still not getting the job done here. And I think we need a kick in the pants. We need the support of people in the room dealing with facts, outside experts and members working together. I think we should give it a shot, and I yield.
If it's okay, I know Mr. Doggett me recognized, but can I just yield 30 seconds? I just want to point something out. I apologize, Lloyd, but just to make ourselves feel a little bit better about ourselves, everyone cites kind of Reagan, Tip O'Neill shaking hands, saving Social Security back in 1983. The part of the story, which is a wonderfully inspiring story, and I appreciate it, the part of the story that's sometimes left out, they were weeks away from missing Social Security checks. That's how dire it was. So to a point you made maybe an hour and a half ago, the fact that we do have about a decade until 2033, it helps us in terms of the numbers right now, but given human nature, it actually hurts us. So let's as we remember fondly the past, let's not forget that actually they did wait until pretty much the last minute before they finally acted. And with that, I yield back.
Representative gentleman from Texas, Mr. Doggett.
Thank you very much. Well, I share the chairman's concern and that of most of the witnesses about our soaring national debt and the need for this Congress to do more to put us on a sound financial footing. I am a progressive Democrat. I believe we're not doing enough on child care, on educational opportunity from pre-K to post-grad, to combating the climate crisis, to ensuring retirement security, and a number of health care, of course. But all of those things cost money. And I believe in paying as you go, and that we cannot shift the cost of doing all those things onto future generations. I understand the skepticism that Chairman Yarmuth voices, and I share it based on the prior experience with these commissions. I think they primarily, as Senator Portman said, have elevated the discussion and kept the issue out there. But I don't see all that much accomplished from them. And I'm certainly strongly against any commission that has as its primary objective to remove accountability or minimize accountability for Congress for cutting Medicare and Social Security. And that, of course, is against a background where the one time we did achieve a balanced budget and we're on a path to significantly reduce the federal debt in the Clinton administration, that didn't take a commission. It took some political courage, and it was fairly costly to some of the people who had the courage to vote to help us get on a balanced budget path. I think that there are a number of proposals. Representative Peters just referenced Congressman Larson's idea on Social Security. I think it has some good points and some flaws. I have one. The president has a proposal out about the future of Medicare and how to finance it, but I'm not sure there's the will in Congress to get this job done, and that's why I'm open at least to the idea of a fiscal commission. I think it has to be a commission that quite clearly puts revenue on the table, because if revenues are not on the table, it is a commission to cut Social Security and Medicare, as the ranking member pointed out with some of the statements that he's filed, and something I care about deeply. And I guess my question to the senators is a commission, based on your experience there with Bowles-Simpson, is it a mechanism? It's impossible for our Republican colleagues to countenance any kind of revenue increase for any purpose, it seems. Is such a commission a place where we might find common ground, not only at looking at areas of excessive government spending growth, but looking at the revenues to help us get true balance?
Can I just respond quickly, Mr. Chairman, and say, when Bowles-Simpson went down, a group of 6 of us in the Senate, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, were asked by leadership to see if we couldn't come up with a way forward to adopt the principles of Bowles-Simpson and make whatever changes were necessary to actually be in a position to pass something. We worked for 2 years, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans. At the end of that time, we put out a proposal that had significant revenue. It also had savings on the spending side. I was asked by President Obama and Vice President Biden to come up and explain to them, how did you get this kind of result? How did you get Republicans to agree to revenue? I said, you know, we spent 2 years going over all of the options and the effects on the people that we represent. And at the end of the day, we had some of the most conservative Republicans in the United States Senate agreeing to substantial increases in revenue. You had Democrats, some of the most progressive Democrats in the United States Senate, agreeing to savings on the spending side. So to me, the need for, I completely agree with Mr. McClintock. This is a responsibility of Congress. They're not doing it. Let's deal with reality. They're not doing it. I agreed entirely with Mr. Higgins' statement about the greatness of America, the strengths of America. I agreed with every word he said. But at the end of the day, we are headed for a 24% cut to every Social Security beneficiary. That's what's going to happen. Now, we could avoid that. We could adopt what Chairman Yarmuth has suggested. That's a serious alternative. But that isn't the law. The law is everybody is going to get cut 24%. Now, when are we going to do something about it?
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. I'll briefly recognize myself again to ask a dear friend, de facto mentor, and former chairman, Mr. Womack, a quick question. But I wanted to just highlight one thing. Folks, we have something good going on here right now. We've got one of the senior members of our side, on the Republican side, saying we don't need this. We have members from the Democrat side saying we do need this. This is good. This is healthy. And I think the point of a catalyst, because we've watched it play out, we are in a different situation than we were in '83. We are in a different situation. And the question, Mr. Womack, two questions. Mandatory spending now is representing over 70% of our budget. That wasn't the case 20, 30, 40 years ago. It's a fundamentally different scenario that we're in now. This is not post-World War II when we could just reduce defense spending and all of a sudden get our debt to GDP back on track. So just share some context with the change in where we are now. And then a question that I did not have prepared for you, I was going to talk about interest rates and stuff, but we've kind of covered that. Give me your sense for where the Republican conference is on this right now. I've seen a lot of discussions on a potential of a debt commission, knowing it's not going to be, a perfect, pristine bill that's going to be tough for everybody. Like, give me your sense. Do you feel something similar? Do you think that there's an urgency and a willingness to engage in this? And I'll defer to you.
Thanks for the question. Willie Sutton, the famous bank robber, when asked why he robbed banks, said, because that's where the money is. And we, as I said in my opening, we spend an enormous amount of time and spend a lot of political capital talking about the discretionary budget. Chairman presiding, Mr. Moore, you are correct. If you go back to 1965, discretionary spending was clearly the largest piece of the federal budget, 65-ish%, give or take. And then now here in 2023, it's completely flipped. It's 70+% on mandatory. So that should illustrate to everyone that has just basic fifth grade arithmetic that if you're going to fix a $2 trillion deficit, and indeed quit digging this hole deeper, you can't do it on discretionary spending. You can barely scratch the surface. The discretionary budget that we are debating right now is in that $1.5 trillion range, and we know that the deficit this year is going to be upwards of $2 trillion. We know that net interest on the debt is going to be north of $650 billion. So we are going to have to muster the courage to be able to deal with it. Now, your question about where Republicans stand on it, let me just cover both sides of the aisle. One side of the aisle would like to take the option off the table of any cuts or any reforms. Let me push back against that. Not necessarily any reforms, but they don't want any reform that is proposed. And when I did my FY19 budget, not in this room, but in this committee, that balanced in a 9-year window, remember the one thing that we did that never made it to the floor, but made it into our budget. We just tried to do something really simple, and that is equalize the age of Medicare eligibility with Social Security. Move the retirement age from 65, the qualification age, 65 to 67. You would have thought I canceled a day of the week. So my argument is, if you can't do something like that, then what, pray tell, can you do to fix the bigger problem? And then when you look to my friends in my caucus, when you start talking about any additional revenues, well, that's hands off. That's why when Senator Conrad said, and I totally agree. And look, I know when this is over and it's published, that the next ad against me is going to be, yeah, this guy wants to raise your taxes. No, what I'm simply saying is when you're this deep in the hole, you better consider every available option on the table, or else you're never going to fix the problem. And that's why it's going to require the courage of the American people. It's why I said that we have to make our constituents subject matter experts, because I believe in my heart this, that if our constituents knew across the spectrum of this great country that this was the near-term biggest national security and economic challenge facing our country, they would step up to the plate and say, I will do my part. That's what Americans do. I will do my part. But they don't trust this Congress because we always have some way around it. We always have an exit ramp. We always have some other way of deferring the challenge. So again, Chairman Moore, I would tell you that if we can educate our constituents and make them subject matter experts, whether it's a commission or a fiscal State of the Union or any other mechanism, then I think we would be on the road to solving the problem and being able to take the heat that the members will fade away, whether it's restructuring or whether it's revenues or any other available option. Sorry to belabor the point.
Thank you, Chairman. I would like to add that every town hall you come to for me in my district, there's a 5 or 6 slide presentation that we do. It's my former consultant coming out, where I really do try to educate and make people understand why we're in the situation that we are, and I just avoid rhetoric and just tell people the facts. And when I do, they actually appreciate it. So I'm trying to do my part, 30 to 40 person town halls at a time. Flora recognizes my good friend from California and son of the leader who last balanced our budget, part of that group that last balanced our budget, Mr. Jimmy Panetta.
Thanks, Blake. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here. Chair Womack, I completely agree with you, and that's something that obviously that I heard plenty of times from that swarthy Italian that's depicted in that portrait over there, is that everything needs to be on the table. I completely agree with you. The problem is, and what I've seen in my limited time here, and what I try to convince my father, is that I do believe it, despite some brains that are in this room, we have lost the art of legislating. We have not got to the point where we've really given that time needed to develop the policy upon which then we can educate the people. And that has a lot to do with leadership and so many other things that we can go on and on about. But I think that really is to our detriment, because when we don't have policy to rely on, then we're left with politics. And we don't have that will to lean in to the policy. And politics sort of dictates what we do. So that is why I'm a firm believer in the Fiscal Commission. It is why I am concerned about our increasing debt and deficits, and I'm committed to working across the aisle to put our country on the path to fiscal responsibility. And like Chairman Yarmuth said, and like many of you are stating, there just isn't the political will to get our fiscal house in order when we use regular order, unfortunately. You got Democrats who are opposing spending cuts, you got Republicans who are opposing tax increases, and we end up increasing our spending and passing tax cuts and ballooning our deficits. Meanwhile, we have a lack of action to shore up our trust funds. It means that we're facing steep cuts to Social Security and Medicaid in a decade. That's why I'm a strong supporter of the commission. That's why I'm proud to introduce the legislation that Scott and Bill put together in regards to this commission and as members of the Bipartisan Fiscal Forum. And I do want to make something clear. As we heard, I do think everything should be on the table, and that includes revenue. The United States is a low-tax country, ranking 32nd out of 38th in OECD countries in terms of tax to GDP ratio. I just think we'll never come to an agreement if we take one half of that equation, revenue, off the table. Now, Brian Riddell, Manhattan Institute, said something that I believe in, that commissions can be useful if both parties are truly committed to achieving an outcome rather than just checking the box. And I think, unfortunately, the way we legislate or don't legislate these days is we just check the box. And that's why I think we need to have this commission to help us get past the politics and help us actually focus on policies that will affect the future. I'm out of time. I do have questions, but I will yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes a gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Trone.
Thanks very much for this time and your efforts here together and this really distinguished panel. I'm probably the only business guy in the room that has 12,000 employees and owns a $6 billion business. And I couldn't agree more than what Mr. Womack had to say. Everything he said, I agree with 100%. And Mr. Panetta, time to develop policy and not just keep developing politics. I mean, totally on board. We've got to look at the whole piece. I mean, the revenue side, I mean, We've got to have that on the table. The C Corp rate, 32.38, I hadn't heard that stat, but we were at 35% on C Corps. Now we're 21. Effective rate's roughly 12%. The G7's effective rate is 23, yet we're only taxing at 12. We've given C Corps just a complete free ride. It's $2 trillion in 10 years, $200 billion a year that we should have for that child tax credit. That's the kind of folks I think we should be doing, is helping folks that are really struggling, children in poverty. That's where we need to get money to drive, but we've got to drive the revenue side. And I'm going to tell you, as a business person, I don't make a decision on opening a new business, and I opened up, my company did probably 20 new businesses this year, and we'll do 25 next year based on the tax rate. No one's ever asked that question. Never. We base it on our competition. Can we beat them? And can we then create a P&L that pencils out? And that's how we look at it. We don't say 35 or 21. That was Donald Trump. He's a pathetic businessman. He's a fraud. He's a failure. Everybody in the business world has always known that he's a fraud and a failure, and why every developer I've ever met said, never do business with him. He's crazy. He's untrustworthy. Why would we touch him? Obviously, he doesn't even use American banks, because no American bank who have plenty of lending capacity would lend to him. That's how he ended up at Deutsche Bank. So bottom line is, we got to look at those things, drive the revenue side. But John Larson's proposal, Social Security, I love that proposal. Good step. But we got to look at everything. It can't just be, one side or the other side. So, but I guess I have one quick question. I got 30 seconds. Mr. Yarmuth, I've always loved working with you. What's holding us back from a serious bipartisan discussion? Is it special interest, the PACs, or members afraid of a primary challenger? What is holding us back from talking about policy?
I think it's, as someone who, by the way, is one of your best customers.
Thank you.
Yeah, and founder and former co-chairman of the Bourbon Caucus. No, I think it's a combination of all those things, Mr. Trone, and I think by and large, I think Mr. Womack has hit it on the head. The American people just are not savvy enough or knowledgeable enough about budget terminology, budget dimensions. It's easy to say, hey, we've got $33 trillion worth of debt when they have a family has a net worth of maybe $10,000, and not expect them to think that things are out of hand. We just don't know. And I know they're economists, and I'm not an economist, who will say, yeah, this is out of hand, interest rates are going to go here. But if you look at the baby boomers, I'm one of them, we're going to disappear from the scene. How does that change the long-term outlook? I just don't think the American people don't have enough information, and I don't think we have enough information to actually accurately portray where we are. And if we can't do it, then the American people are not going to, they're going to be much more vulnerable to these rhetorical arguments and the exaggerations and so forth that is unfortunately what they get now. And
Got to bring a lot more truth back to the matter, and not a lot of such rhetoric and hyperbole.
And just let me say real quick.
Truth's what matters.
I totally agree with you about business people making decisions based on tax rates. I come from a family of business people. My father ran a Fortune 500 company. My brothers have been very successful. They've never made a decision based on the tax rate.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. And given Chairman Yarmuth's handicap, I thought you would have been a golf club salesman. It's interesting to find that out. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, first of all, I want to dispel the idea that this is a both sides do it problem and remind people that every Democratic presidential administration since Kennedy has left for their Republican successors a better deficit situation than they inherited, without exception. And every Republican administration has left for their Democratic successors a worse deficit situation than they inherited, without exception. And President Trump was on the way to fulfilling that trend before the pandemic. One of the reasons is that under Republicans. They don't pay for tax cuts, and so every time there's a tax cut, it just ruins the budget. And one thing I was here in 1993. Senator Conrad, you were here, and I think, Rob, you voted on the 93 budget. You just gotten here. It was contentious. It was down to the wire. Not a single Republican voted for it. And when it passed, it put us on a trajectory to not only balancing, but creating surpluses sufficient to paying off the national debt by 2008, putting all the money back in the trust funds by 2013. When they talk about the historic balanced budget agreements in the mid-90s, they ignore the fact that Gingrich, when he came in 95 as Speaker, shut the government down trying to dismantle the budget. And he couldn't do it because Clinton wouldn't budge. And the budget continued to succeed, went in a balance and a surplus. And if you wanted to know what the Republicans had in mind, we found out in 2001 when they had the trifecta, the House, Senate, and President, when you had massive tax cuts, 2 wars not paid for, tax cuts not paid for, prescriptive drug not paid for, and all of that budget projection of paying off the national debt evaporated. One of the reasons we had of the differential between Democrats and Republicans is unpaid for tax cuts. So I would ask Representative Womack if you would agree as a condition of starting the commission an agreement that we'd go to pay-go for tax cuts.
I believe in any mechanism that can be enforced without Congress deciding that we're not going to enforce it. And I think we can go back to pay-go and we can have a long conversation about whether pay-go was actually enforced.
Well, let me just say, reclaiming my time, under the Democrats, we pay for new spending and we pay for tax cuts. Under Republican rule, you pay for new spending, but you do not have to pay for tax cuts.
Well, I mean, I would agree that
Okay.
Principally, if you're going to have any impact on the budget in a negative way, that you need to have a mechanism in place that either provides an offset that you will honor.
Well, I'm talking about starting a commission. I have no time left, so let me just pose some questions. If y'all want to answer them, fine, but I think they just ought to be posed anyway. The ranking member pointed out that the public, given the choice of taxing people over the present limit of $160,000 on Social Security, would rather do that than suffer benefit cuts. On a commission, one of the problems with the commission might be that dealing with short-term budget problems, how do you deal with long-term problems like climate change, investments we need to be making, how would they be? They would not be well reflected. And a concern that there's a difference between talking about doing something and actually doing something. The commission may give many people an opportunity to pretend that they're doing something and delay the inevitable. We have tough choices to make. We just need to make them. And with that, if anybody wants to comment, otherwise I'd yield back.
Sure, defer to you, Senator.
Just very briefly, I'd say this to the congressman who I enjoyed working with very much back in the day. You know, it just strikes me that we've got an opportunity to take this on in a structure that gets both people at the table focusing on the issues, whether it's climate, whether it's revenue, whether it's spending, that you have an opportunity to be at the table to have these serious discussions. We all know the way the budget process works now, you really don't have that opportunity. You know, we're both locked into a partisan struggle that avoids the real tough discussions that we need to have. And will it work? I have no idea. The one thing I know for sure is that what's happening now is not working. And it strikes me that let's have an opportunity to try something else. Let's have an opportunity to try something different. That's what I'd say to the gentleman.
Mr. Chairman and Mr. Scott, two points I want to make. This is going back to the Joint Select Committee on Budget Process Reform. We went into the process reform process recognizing that it was a process. It was designed to change the process. It was not based on developing some kind of outcome, i.e., what we're going to do at the end of this thing is going to create some outcome. What we wanted was to improve the process. And the process involved a number of things that are included in my testimony this morning. The other thing that we were able to put in this package was realizing that a balanced budget amendment is problematic for the Congress for a lot of reasons, that we installed a debt to GDP target, which we thought would be very important. Debt to GDP meaning that in these larger policy discussions, climate change et al., you look at those policies in terms of what is it going to do to the economic condition of the country if you do it or don't do it, and does it fit within the debt to GDP range, so that we could start to encourage, Mr. Yarmuth talked about how you either cut spending or you raise taxes. Well, actually, there is a third option out there. Grow your economy. And that's what happens when you have the larger policy discussion. So debt to GDP became our metric to use, and by the way, that was a Sheldon Whitehouse recommendation. So I think if we could get back to the inconvenient truths of where we stand and make our constituents subject matter experts, it makes it a lot easier for us to enact meaningful legislation.
Chairman, just briefly, and Bobby, we worked together closely when I was in the House and also in the Senate. I've always enjoyed working with you, and reflecting on your comments and Mr. Peters' comments, Mr. Panetta's comments, Mr. Trone's comments, this is about finding common ground. That's what we've lost, the art of the deal was talked about earlier. And if you have an objective that everybody agrees to, which you get out of a commission, and you have to sign up to an objective. I mentioned earlier there needs to be some fiscal metric. That may be the hardest thing this commission has to do. Once you agree to that and everybody's on board, and this requires the leaders of Congress, Republicans and Democrats, to put the right people on this commission who actually want to get to an answer. Because it's too easy not to get to an answer around here and be benefited by it politically, whether it's the way the media treats you, because you can get on Meet the Press if you're going to be out there rabble-rousing. You can raise more money online, the way the political system is working in terms of our primaries. We got to get back to a system where we're serving the people, and that means agreeing on that objective. I think the commission is a vehicle to do that. Kind of along the lines of what my friend Conrad just said. It will require this serious discussion. It'll force the Congress to deal with these issues rather than talking past each other, which is, in my experience, what's happened more and more over the past 30 years I've been in public service. So I sense you have an open mind, my friend. I hope you do, because I think this could be a catalyst.
I posed the question. I did want to make a quick comment about the balanced budget amendment. I think we ought to discuss whether that process would actually make it easier or harder to actually balance the budget. My view is the parameters of the balanced budget amendment would make it virtually impossible to ever get control of the budget. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you. And from that exact point, I'll just highlight what Chairman Womack said. I mean, he focused on debt to GDP. Like, if we could make the focus on debt to GDP, we could actually have substantial ground that we could gain in this direction. If we make it, we even did, there are some in this committee that don't feel comfortable waiting for 10 years to get to a balanced budget. What we put the marker on, it's very difficult. 10 years, goodness, that's so far away for a lot of people. If we could get to a point where we were talking debt to GDP and putting those markers in place and establishing the guardrails so we could make that case, I think that's an addition to this piece. Using my newfound power as chair, I want to just make one quick comment to your first part. I have numerous times acknowledged that President Clinton was a key aspect, particularly with Mr. Panetta, a good friend, of finding a way to get to that balanced budget when a Democrat leads. But we cannot also dismiss the fact that oftentimes when there's a Democrat that takes the White House, what follows is a Republican Congress. And that friction also creates good outcomes for us to be able to make movements here. And so that happens in many, and when it moves the other way when there's a Republican. And so there's, to say that Republican presidents haven't cared about this, I don't think is fully accurate. And I'm willing to address it on both sides. The point I would like to quickly make, what we've gotten to the point where we've gotten in Congress is this once-in-a-generation type of legislating that happens when you have the trifecta. When you have the White House, House, and Senate in one party, we have this knee-jerk reaction to go big. And that's not ultimately the best 20-30 long-term approach to legislating. So we, 2017 made big, I think the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did an exceptional job of growing the economy, but we didn't take much advantage of finding areas to reduce our spending. And that's a criticism I have of our own party. And the 2021 experience that I had when the trifecta existed in the Democrat Party, we had a $1.9 trillion bill in ARPA with no offset spending that whether you blame it, inflation all on that, I don't. I say there's a lot of factors that contribute it, but I agree with Larry Summers when say this was a huge contributor to our inflation. So we get into these modes of we have to go big now because we have the trifecta. We got White House, House, and Senate, and we can bypass the filibuster, so we got to go big. Instead, this is we're trying to do the opposite here and make something 30 years out. I have 4 kids, 10 and under. That's all I care about. I care what they're going to be doing. If they're sending $1 of tax and 50 cents of it goes to paying the interest when they get their first job, I will have failed my job right now. And I don't want to fail this job. So I just like to add some context there that we have these moments in split government to actually make some progress here. So thank you. And with that, I appreciate the latitude that I gave myself, apparently, to yield now to Mr. Espaillat, gentleman from New York, to recognize him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Budgets are political documents. They pretty much state what our values are, what we believe in, how do we look at the state of the economy in America. Budgets they have a heartbeat, they have a pulse. And part of the problem in developing a fair and transparent budget that reflects the condition of America, hunger in America, people's inability to pay rent in America, the struggles of working families in America, is the fact that many of my colleagues in Congress are millionaires. And so as a result, they are unable to penetrate and reach out of the bubble and see what the American people are going through on a daily basis. And so, for example, the child tax credit program was referred to here as an entitlement. $2,000 for a 17-year-old or under. That results to $166.66 a month for a mom. Is that going to break our back? That's something that we cannot do for somebody that maybe is on a hunger line, trying to feed their families. The earned income tax credit for poor families that are making under $59,000 a year. Just a little push so they could maybe buy Pampers, milk, and maybe be able not to fall back on the rent. Is that going to break our backs? And so we propose a commission here. Some folk call that the paralysis of analysis. America is smart. They read through stuff. You know what they say out there, those that cannot go outside of the bubble because they just have so much money in their bank accounts that they don't have a clear vision? You want to kill a good idea? Build a commission. You want to stop innovativeness? Give it to a task force. You want to have deep cuts that cut to the bone like they try to do this year? Study it. Create a study group. This year we had an agreement between the leader of our House and the president. Some of us felt that they usurped appropriators like myself that constitutionally have the power of the purse. And that wasn't enough. They broke the agreement and they came here and they wanted to cut it to the bone. That mom that wants $166.66 per month through a child tax credit, they wanted to cut what some of you call entitlements to the bones. Now, revenue. Revenue is at the center of this because the Trump tax cut benefited the very wealthy, the very rich, not the police officer, not the teacher, not the civil servant, the very rich. That's an entitlement, a corporate entitlement. And that's right at the core, and it's not talked about, debt and deficit. So, Mr. Yarmuth, thank you for still having a fail grade in your lapel. And I want to hear from you, if you may. What is the role of these Trump tax cuts for the very rich in the current fiscal condition facing the nation?
You know, talking about tax cuts, thank you, Mr. Espiat, for that question. I go back to my brother, who's been very successful in business and always voted Republican because he wanted to pay less tax. Well, back in 2008, he called me, and he said, John, you'll be happy to know that Judy, his wife, Judy and I are maxing out to Barack Obama, and we're voting for all Democrats this year. And I said, that's great, Bob. What was your epiphany? And he said, he's in the barbecue business, barbecue restaurants. He said, I finally figured out that if nobody can afford barbecue, it doesn't matter what my tax rate is. And I think, you know, in terms of, you know, Chairman Moore's comment about debt to GDP ratio, there are an awful lot of economists now who say that's not a meaningful ratio. It doesn't really reflect the sustainability or indicate the sustainability of our debt. So, you know, my fear about a commission is, yes, you could take the position that there's no harm in doing a commission. It does promote conversations, but there is some danger with a commission that makes recommendations that fail, because then the commission's failed, Congress has failed once again. So if you said, we're gonna do a commission which actually analyzes the question of debt sustainability and doesn't get into recommendations for cuts or increases and so forth, and really provides some education as opposed to suggestions, I might be much more inclined to accept that, because I think that would be a valuable thing for the country to have. Exactly what is the impact of our debt? Doesn't matter. How much can we live with? But again, if you're going to get into recommendations that ultimately are going to prove very difficult politically, then I think there's a real risk in doing a commission, and that's why I'm concerned about it.
And that's why I love that there's so many economists out there, because I oftentimes love to disagree with them. And I will vehemently disagree. The debt to GDP isn't a strong indicator of what we need to continue on. And to just make the point, as I move to our last questions here, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was actually the impetus, it doubled our child tax credit. So we have to recognize, as making that point, child tax credit was doubled under the TCJA, right? And so this was is something that gets blamed in saying it was only for the rich, when it targeted the middle class, and making sure with the standard deduction as well. Like, that's just facts that there was there. And I get it. Like I've said, I've criticized everybody in the last 20 years, and that everybody falls into that. But I think that's an important point to make. And moving on to our final speaker, and I think, folks, and if we have to take off, Mr. Yakim from Indiana is now recognized, and someone that has been an absolute breath of fresh air. Just a month or two behind me on this, and part of this group that really wants to tackle this issue. So thank you, and you will be our final questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to submit a Washington Post article by George F. Will into the record.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you to our witnesses for being here today, to both of our former U.S. senators, to our current member, who happens to be my assigned mentor in Congress. Mr. Womack, I could not have asked for a better one. Thank you. And to our former member as well. I also have a few of my constituents who are here. Thanks for being here today. Our federal debt currently stands at over $33.5 trillion. That equates to a debt to GDP ratio of 124%. No one can look at these numbers and believe that the fiscal state of our nation is sound. These spending habits have led to serious economic problems, including inflation at a 40-year high under the Biden administration. This has made it much harder for the Hoosiers that I represent, and for all Americans, to provide for their families and plan for the future. Like many of us, I came to Washington to help build a better future for my constituents. But passing policies that consistently increase government spending is not building a better future. I fully support establishing a fiscal commission, but we need to carefully design it so that we don't actually do nothing, but we actually change this nation in the course of our fiscal stability. The last thing we need is another report outlining the problem while failing to make any tangible changes. We know what the problem is. The federal government spends too much money without regard to our national debt. Our fiscal house is not in order. And at a time of nearly $2 trillion in annual deficits, it's continuing to get worse. We need to restore fiscal responsibility immediately. Each of you served on one of the previous commissions aimed at taking control of our spending and restoring fiscal responsibility. My question is this: in your experience, what were the biggest hurdles that you faced in implementing the recommendations of previous commissions, and what would you recommend that we do differently to ensure that the commission's recommendations actually become law? I'd like to start with my House mentor, Mr. Womack.
Well, you raise a good question, and as I've said a couple of times in my testimony here today, the challenge with Congress is that we create commissions and we create task forces and we look at problem sets and we develop potential solutions, and then there's no real mechanism to give them the force of law. And so as a result of those, we look at them, they become shiny objects, and we acknowledge and brag about our great work, and it goes into our resume, but it never becomes, the law of the land. And so there has to be some mechanism in place that gives it the force of law. Congress just has too many areas, and we defer. We defer past milestones. We defer past holidays. We defer past elections. We defer. And it makes it easy, they call it kicking the can down the road. It makes it really easy to move it to the next milestone. Right now, we're on a continuing resolution till November the 17th. That's the next milestone. And we will do something that will move us past that milestone. And then the next milestone is going to be the holidays. And then the next milestone is going to probably be the 24 election. And so we just have to have some ability to be able to constrain Congress from moving past the moment to some future milestone and give it the force of law today. So if that can be accomplished, then I think we're well on our way to solving for the crisis. Now, the other thing I'll say, and then I'll finish, and that is, so much of what we're talking about today becomes what I call an inconvenient truth. And the American public we're afraid to tell the American public the inconvenient truth, because if you tell them what the problem is, they're going to want to know what the solution is, and as soon as you advocate for a solution, that trial balloon gets shot down before it gets 6 inches off the ground, and then you become a marked target. So those are the issues that we have to settle within ourselves, both sides of the aisle, and give us an opportunity to put this issue behind us, because it is a growing threat to our country.
Thank you, Congressman Womack. And Senator Portman, same question. What would you recommend that we do differently to ensure that the next commission that's set up actually makes recommendations that become law?
Yeah, good question. By the way, I appreciate your comments on not just laying out a problem, but actually coming up with a solution. The problem's pretty easy to describe, and everybody on both sides of the aisle has kind of railed on the problem from a different perspective. But the question is, how do you actually, again, come up with a metric that makes sense, whether it's a 10-year balanced budget, whether it's a debt to GDP, and then have the objective of everybody there on that commission dedicated to trying to get there, to find that common ground. If you don't have that, it's not going to work. So I think that's maybe the most important thing. Second, I will say, just to the comment that some of these commissions or groups don't end up, getting passed. Again, 60% of Simpson Bowles ended up getting passed by roughly 2015. I was on this super committee. It said it wasn't too super. Almost all of our suggestions ended up getting incorporated over time. It's amazing because members of Congress were desperate to find, some proposals, and well, the super committee looked at this, even though the super committee itself failed to get a majority vote. The ideas and the research that was done was very helpful. And then finally, as we talked about earlier, just raising the visibility of this issue, forcing Congress to deal with it. But I would say, to answer your question more directly, the other most important aspect, other than having this objective, having the commitment to find that common ground, would be having a up or down vote. So I think you've got to have the ability to have an expedited procedure in the United States Senate, and then to have a vote. As you know, the Senate's a tougher body to deal with regard to the rules, and then the House, not just the 60 votes, but the fact that things can get hung up. So you have to have an expedited procedure, and eventually force a vote, force the ability of this Congress to come together and make a tough vote, tough decisions. As I said earlier, I think what the commission gives you is hopefully trust. It builds trust by choosing the right people and the right experts, and just being straight like you are in Indiana and the Midwest, and just telling people this is what it's about. Second is, I do think it provides some knowledge, information that maybe not everybody has, because you'll have people who are really targeted and focused on this issue. And I think Mr. Yarmuth and others have talked about that. That would be a good thing about it. And then third, if you have a commission that's going to report, it does provide a little political cover. And people say, well, maybe, we don't need political cover in here. Well, obviously we do, because, nothing else has worked. And the cover is, hey, this isn't perfect, not what I would have done exactly, but on the other hand, $33 trillion. Your 4 boys, your kids and grandkids. I mean, this is something that, we have to suck it up and do the right thing for the country. So I think those are the ingredients for success.
Thank you, Senator Portman, and Mr. Chairman, thank you for chairing this committee hearing today on the biggest domestic.
Mr. Yakum, could I interject one thing?
Please.
When this whole discussion about the budget process, this whole discussion about the debt commission, this whole discussion about the fiscal condition of our country, and back to your question about what we can do to put some teeth into it and to constrain Congress, it reminds me of the cab drive I had in Cairo, Egypt, when I was deployed back in 2002, right after 9/11. We're driving down the road in the cab, and it's all over the road, and it's a 3-wide lane, and there's 4-wide traffic. And I asked the cab driver, I said, hey man, do you not see the lines in the road? And he looked at me and he said, those are merely a suggestion. And that's exactly how I would describe the process that the U.S. Congress uses to manage its budgets, and precisely why we are in the condition we're in. I yield back.
I could not agree more, and thank you, Congressman Womack. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
And I couldn't come up with better comments to end on than all of that. Very clear statements about the need for this and putting into perspective. So thank you all. Thank you, Senators Portman and Conrad, and Chairmans Womack and Yarmuth, all dedicated public servants and willing to have made a mark on this place and continuing to do so. So thank you all very much. Please be advised that members may submit written questions to be answered later in writing. Those questions and your answers will be made part of the formal hearing record. Any members who wish to submit questions for the record may do so within 7 days. And with that, committee stands adjourned.